Hey everyone, and welcome to Love Like Crazy podcast. We're your hosts, Jay and Stacey Coleman, and we are so glad that you've joined us today. We're here in our home studio and ready to talk about a topic that was actually suggested by one of our listeners. And so we just love that we're getting feedback from all of our listeners, and thank you for that. And so continue to spread the word for us, get the word out that this podcast is helping to build stronger marriages and families. So I'm not alone here today. I'm here with my better half, Jay. And so Jay, we're going to jump in on that topic that has been suggested to us, and that is conflict resolution. And so some of our listeners have asked, how can we fight well? Because you know that in marriage, I mean, we've been married 31 years, that we're going to have disagreements. We're going to have arguments, times that we're frustrated with one another. So let's...
Are you frustrated with me right now?
There are many times that I'm frustrated with you.
Well, this is a topic that we can discuss today that everybody, I think, can gain something from. The reason why is because it doesn't matter if you're single, it doesn't matter if you're married, it doesn't matter if you're, dating somebody, maybe engaged to somebody, planning for a wedding. Mm-hmm. Conflict comes up. It happens, and you can call it whatever you want. We're having a disagreement. We're having a fight. We're having a conflict. It's all the same thing. Mm-hmm. I think I learned that some years ago. I had a good minister friend of mine that they had been married at that point probably 20 years. You and I were newlyweds.
Yeah.
And in conversation, you and I had gotten into a disagreement.
Disagreement, yes, and, air quotes here.
Yeah, and I went into the office and I said something to him about it, and I'm like, yeah, every married couple, and he's like, no, my wife and I have never gotten into a fight before, and I'm like, there's no way, and he's like, no, we've never gotten into a fight. And fast forward from that conversation, about a week down the road, I see him and his wife in the parking lot, and it's obvious that they're having something that's causing tension.
Yeah.
And so later in the office, I made a comment to him, hey, it looks like you and your wife had your first fight. And he was like, no, what are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, I saw you on the parking lot. You look like y'all were having a fight. And he said, oh, no, we were not fighting. We were having a disagreement. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, so at that point, I'm like, call it whatever you want. It is a fight, disagreement. It's all conflict, right, and you're dealing with it. And I think it's sad to say that a lot of couples, they get married, they maybe were not having conflict before they got married as much. Mm-hmm. When we were dating, when we were engaged, we had some things we walked through. But you throw two people into an apartment, a house, mm-hmm, whatever, with different ideas, opinions, mindsets, the way you were raised.
When you're having to finally live together,
exactly,
things come up, and we don't use the same toothpaste, or the way the toilet paper rolls is there's just all these different things that you have to learn.
You're getting used to each other.
Right, you're getting used to each other once you get married, and so those little arguments can come up
and quickly turn into World War III.
Yes.
So, and we had quite a bit of that whenever we were first married. And I'm a lot of couples now, especially in the culture that we're living in, they cohabitate before they get married.
Right.
Back in the day, we called it shacking up, but now it's
But we did not shack up.
I
just want to clarify that, okay?
We believed in maintaining separate residence. I lived with my parents. You were at college until we got married, and I guess about a month or so out from getting married, I got an apartment,
right,
and we were getting ready to get married. But a lot of couples, they think, well, if we cohabitate, the divorce rate's going to go down. Actually, the divorce rate for people who cohabitate before they get married is higher. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because, I like to say it like this, you burn through a lot of the equity that you have. When we first got married, that honeymoon phase, the newness of it, the excitement of it,
right,
helped us bridge the gap on a lot of the disagreements that we had. We would have a disagreement about something. We would resolve the fight, disagreement, the conflict, and then the excitement of we were like, okay, we made it through this. And then, as I like to say, we would make up, then we would make out.
Make up and make out. Yeah, that is your term.
So now, when you have couples who cohabitate before they get married, they burn through all that equity before they get married. So you get down the road a couple years, you get married. You get into a disagreement, the newness, the excitement, the things you're learning about each other, that's gone.
Yeah, it wears
off.
And
so they think, well, we were not fighting like this before, so we need to get divorced. And
well, don't you think, too, that it's part of just maturity, especially when, like us, we were really young when we got married, and you're stepping into adulting and just trying to have to learn about each other.
Yeah.
Even when you don't live together before you get married, and it's just this whole new experience. It takes a lot, and maybe the maturity level isn't there to understand enough conflict resolution.
Well, we all have a sin nature. And I think in that sin nature, part of it is we are very selfish. We're thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about what we want, what is best for me, myself, and I. And I know for me personally, I was very selfish. I was very immature whenever we got married. And, it factors right into that. And so I think a lot of couples, especially if you're young, when you get married, you are immature. You are selfish. And that sin nature leading you can cause you to want what you want in that moment. So that's I think that's part of it today, is learning how to discuss, learning how to deal with conflict, disagreements, fighting, whatever you want to call it, as it comes up, and learning to deal with it and move forward from it in a healthy way.
Because you and I, we were in our early 20s when we got married, and so there was some different things that happened that, we had to learn how to maneuver and learn more about, like we were saying, each other, to where we were resolving our conflicts in a more healthy way.
Yeah, I would say it like this, and I love that you brought that up, because how you resolve conflict will determine the quality of your life. I don't know if I've heard that somewhere or if it's by me. But how you resolve that conflict, it will determine if you're going to have a great life or not. Here's what that kind of amounts to. If you resolve conflict in an unhealthy way, or you don't deal with the conflict, you just kind of brush it under the rug, there's going to be tension, there's going to be strife, there's going to be anger. But if you learn to deal with conflict in a healthy way, and let's just say you take it to God, you repent, you ask Him to change you to be the spouse towards one another that you need to be, then what you have is you have unity and you have peace.
Yes.
And so learning to deal with conflict is powerful. So why don't you do this? I think that everybody, the where it came from was talk about conflict, how we can deal with conflict. Let's talk about healthy and unhealthy conflict.
Okay. So I think an unhealthy way of dealing with conflict is like when we just put up a wall.
Yep.
When something happens, your spouse says something that you don't like, or you take offense at it. Maybe your perception of the situation is different. So you isolate yourself, you put a wall up.
You push them away, maybe even push them away.
Push them away, and then sometimes even do maybe the silent treatment, because you're upset and you're like, well, I just don't want to deal with it. That can produce some bitterness, maybe some anger. And then you start using your words, and maybe even your actions, to hurt your spouse. You're coming back with ugly words like, I'm gonna get to you before you can get to me, kind of thing. And so, it's a snowball effect to where it just keeps going back and forth, and it's an unhealthy way of resolving things.
I think it's probably fair to say that in your mind you think, I am resolving this, but you're not.
Right.
Because you're allowing those things to stay there because of what you said, because of the way you handle it. It's still there. It's not been dealt with.
And a lot of times it's festering, and it can build that bitterness and resentment.
And I think that we could probably both agree with this. It will probably come back up the next time that there's conflict, and it just kind of builds layer upon layer.
Right.
And that's where you begin to develop a very unhealthy relationship.
Because it's not totally resolved. And so then, yes, something else is going to happen that's going to bring it all back up. And then, of course, it's unhealthy whenever you start bringing up things from the past. And you and I, we've done that, when we're arguing and we're like, remember when you did this and that or the other. And so that's an unhealthy way of resolving conflict, bringing up things from the past.
Well, I think it's probably fair to tell our listeners, a lot of times people look at where you are now and they think, oh, you guys love each other.
You never had any rough times, right?
But there's so much, you could say water under the bridge, working on your relationship, working on your marriage to get it to where it is. So when we were much younger, as I said earlier, I was very selfish. I was very immature. And what I found was over the course of time that going to the Lord and asking Him to change me to be the spouse to you that you needed me to be. And at the same token, asking the Lord to help, heal both of our hearts so that we can love each other with the love of Christ.
Right. So, absolutely. Yeah. And so
let me clarify here. So you're saying unhealthy conflict, there's bitterness, there's anger, there's isolation because you put up a wall between you and your spouse, and all these things just kind of build over the course of time. So what is healthy, dealing with conflict in a healthy way? What does it look like?
Well, I think it's taking the time to sit down and have the discussion that's needed instead of like unhealthy is isolating yourself. Okay, let's sit down and let's take time let's talk this through. Why are we feeling this way? I think a lot of times we brush off each other's feelings about things instead of talking about it and getting things out in the open. And of course that is that communication that's needed.
Actually, a later episode, we're going to talk about communicating in a healthy way and having good communication skills. So.
Right. So this is where it comes into play, especially when you're having a disagreement. And so you need to discuss things privately, like don't have an outburst, in front of other people. Don't go off on each other in such a way that it can't be resolved in a healthy way. Sit down and talk about it.
I think probably a good way to say that is keep the things between you privately, discuss privately.
Yes.
I think that we probably, our listeners, and I know you and I have witnessed this before, couples getting into an altercation, getting into a conflict in front of other people.
Right.
And unfortunately, that always makes everybody uncomfortable. There's tension there. I think that, one of the big no-nos would probably to tell everybody this: don't air out your dirty laundry in front of your kids.
Yes, I was just thinking that.
I'm not going to sit here and say that we never had a disagreement in front of our kids.
We have. We've raised our voice to each other. And then, of course, looked back and said, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And we've even had to tell our kids, hey, look, Mom and Dad, we're sorry. We raised our voice. This wasn't right. And we're sorry, because it just sets the tone in the home in a bad way.
Yeah. And I know for us, we would always try to carry the conversation over into the bedroom, maybe even push it further back into the bathroom, because there was a little bit better buffer zone there, to be able to discuss some things. And, I did try to do my best to keep my voice tone where it needs to be, but I'm a big guy and I'm a loud guy. And unfortunately, a lot of times you would say, it's your tone, it's your tone.
Yeah.
And I tried to do a good job of controlling that, but I didn't always do the best at that. So, but I think that one of the things, and we're talking about this, is keep your stuff private. Don't air out your stuff, and don't have a fight in front of your kids. Don't have a fight in front of, your friends when you're having a game night, lots of friends over, and you disagree over Pictionary. Don't get in a fight in front of everybody and air out your dirty laundry. So that's a healthy thing. Keep it private.
I think too, we have this thought process of, okay, well, healthy conflict is we never raise our voice. Everything's very soft-spoken. No, when we're having a discussion, when we're trying to hash things out, sometimes voices are elevated, and that's okay, but don't let it get out of control with one another, because ultimately, it could be something that's formed out of stress. And a lot of times we take things out on each other. We're venting on each other. And, but there needs to be that settling down and resolving it in a positive way.
Making up and then
making out. There you go. So, and and when you're trying to settle your conflict, you need to acknowledge when there's wrongdoing, and say, okay, I was wrong about this or that.
I can tell you that a lot of times there were situations where I knew I was wrong in an area.
And did you not want to admit that you were wrong?
I can straight up tell you, because of pride, like I'm the man, I'm the head of this household. I didn't necessarily want to admit that wrongdoing and apologize to you. But one of the things that I've discovered is this, that the closer I walk in relationship to the Lord, and the more I'm asking Him to change me, there was eventually, in the course of the disagreement, conflict, fight, whatever you want to call it, there was that point when the Holy Spirit would just kind of break my will and bring me to the place where I would repent and I'd apologize. I remember one time, I was on my way home from the gym. I don't know if you remember that or not, and came home we had a disagreement about something, and we had resolved it, but it was still kind of there. And on the way home, the Holy Spirit just arrested me and convicted me, and I came home and woke you up and
Yes.
apologized to you, and you apologized to me as well.
Right.
And it was just a good healing moment, in our marriage. And that, a lot of people say, "Oh, you've been married so long." That was just a few years ago that actually happened. So this is something that you can learn, and this is something you can grow in no matter where you are.
And that's part of it. That's part of the maturity of it to develop into healthy conflict resolution, because a lot of times, we're coming into this marriage with all kinds of baggage, things from our past, things that set us off or trigger us and cause us to our emotions and our feelings to lead in our actions. And so, that once you can, get that understanding of settling yourself down and acknowledging maybe there's some wrongdoing on my part. Maybe there is wrongdoing on the other person's part, but to be able to recognize it.
Well, we're usually pretty good at recognizing where
Each
our spouse
other's
is wrong.
Right.
In the conflict. Like, you're wrong, and I need you to admit to me that you're wrong.
Right.
And as long as you have those two, a prideful, arrogant, heart and spirit, and it's like, I'm right and you're wrong, but you got to come to the place where you realize no matter how right you are wrong
Right.
in some areas. And I think that just kind of comes down to, like you said, maturity. I probably have shared this before in a past episode. No matter where you are in your marriage, you always have to be working on your marriage.
Right.
I remember I had a couple come and sit down with me. This was probably 13, 14 years ago. They came and sat down with me, and they were at a season in life. They were working through some stuff. And I asked them, I said, "How long have y'all been married?" And they were like, right at 50 years.
50 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, I'm sitting
That's
there
wonderful.
and I'm helping them kind of navigate. And it really wasn't that big of a deal, what they were walking through, but they didn't want it to affect their marriage in a further way. And I remember sitting with them thinking, like, you guys have been married this long, y'all need to be counseling me.
Right.
But what I discovered, my takeaway from that is, it does not matter how long you've been married. You need to always be working on your marriage.
Well, and we're always in need of growing and maturing.
Yeah.
That's just a constant. And so we should never think that we shouldn't be in that place, because we should.
Absolutely. So dealing with conflict in an unhealthy way leads anger, leads to bitterness, all these things that just kind of pile up in your marriage and cause even more conflict down the road. Dealing with conflict in a healthy way is admitting wrongdoing, keeping your matters private, not airing out the dirty laundry in front of other people. And I would say this as well. It's a willingness to allow God to change you to really be the spouse to one another that He's called you to be.
Because ultimately we want to please the Lord.
Yeah.
And if that means making changes in how we respond to each other, then that's what we need to do.
Now, I want to kind of take the conversation in this direction, because we're going to talk about some healthy habits in conflict that you face. These are things that you and I have talked about before. And it's things that are when you come down to it, it's just common sense. But I've always equated this whenever I counsel with people, whenever I talk with people, it is looking at things like, if you're going to have a fight, then let's look at things from a fighter's stance. Let's look at things from the mindset of a wrestler. Let's look at things from the mindset of a boxer. I know now MMA is really big.
Right.
I love to watch MMA. I think it's a lot of fun to watch these fights and see these fighters, the skill that they possess. So you take that and you bring it into a disagreement, conflict, a fight between husband and wife, or maybe somebody else. And there's some things that we've learned, if we're going to look at this from the aspect of a fighter. Here's some things that you can do to deal with conflict whenever it comes up. And the first thing is this: you got to learn to stay in the ring.
Okay, that's good.
Now, a lot of people say, well, what are you talking about? A lot of times whenever conflict comes to the surface, people want to run. You've got, maybe the husband, maybe the wife, they say, no, I don't want to deal with this. And so they want to run. And that is a very unhealthy way to deal with conflict, is to sweep it under the rug, not want to deal with it, want to get out of the situation, and just try to kick the ball down the field. Right. And that's one of the things whenever I counsel with people, I say, stay in the ring. You've got to deal with this. You've got to be able to deal with this. We've talked about it in a healthy way, but don't run away. Stay in the ring until you hash this thing
Well,
out.
running away is kind of like that. Don't isolate yourself. Don't, separate yourself in such a way that's unhealthy. No, stay put. Be ready to fight for your marriage.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I want to read this to you. Proverbs 18:1, it says, "A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment." In other words, we're talking about common sense, but whenever you isolate yourself and you start listening sometimes to your emotional thoughts, it can lead to an unhealthy place within the marriage. So don't isolate yourself.
No.
Submit yourself to wise counsel of other people, and do not isolate yourself. But learn to stay in the ring. I know that, look, straight up, I failed in this area one time. I don't know if you remember this or not. It was the first year of our marriage. We were living in Tanglewood Terrace.
Okay.
This is and it's a little apartment complex in Pineville, Louisiana. We were newlyweds. We got into it one day, and we were not dealing with conflict at that point in a healthy way.
No.
We were young. We were immature. I was very selfish. And I remember we got into it for whatever reason, and I said, you know what? I've had it. We didn't use the D word. You've heard us talk about that in past episodes. That was kind of one of those convictions that we set in place early on. We're not getting divorced. We're going to work this out. We don't use the D word. I didn't use the D word, but I said, you know what? I got to get out of here.
Right.
And so I remember I jumped in my little Nissan 4x4
I believe
pickup truck.
our voices got a little loud too in that argument that I remember.
Probably so. I would tend to believe that as loud as a person I am, my voice probably did. But I remember getting in my truck and leaving, and I remember you were standing on the front porch of that apartment as I went down the stairs. I looked back up and you were crying, and I'm like thinking to myself, like, good, you deserve it. I was so stupid.
You were so happy to make me cry. That is terrible.
I was dumb, but I remember getting in my truck and driving off, and leaving. And I'm thinking to myself,
I'm crying more because I don't know where you're going or if you're coming back.
He's not coming back. And I remember leaving and driving, and there was a lake down the road. I remember I drove around the lake, kind of calmed down a little bit, and eventually it was probably 30 minutes. Went back to the house or back to the apartment, and we worked things out. And that probably was not good for me to do that. And leave the situation in the condition that it was. So this is what I'm going to say. We're talking about staying in the ring. Stay in the ring and deal with the issue.
Okay, well, I think you did one thing right, one thing wrong. Okay, just leaving like that and making me cry even more was the wrong thing to do. But the right thing to do was that you took a moment to gather yourself, driving around the lake, whatever, a lot of times we have to step back from the situation that we're in, gather our thoughts, and then that way we can respond in a healthier way.
Yeah, well, whenever I counsel with people, a lot of times I tell them, I call this, it's a stand in fighting, what boxing is called a standing 8 count.
Okay.
Sometimes you need to call for a standing 8 count. Remember, we're thinking about things from the aspect of a fighter. Stay in the ring. Deal with the issue. Don't run away.
Don't run away from it.
Don't isolate yourself or push somebody away. Stay in the ring and deal with the issue. But there is also, I'm glad you brought this up, because it is healthy to call for a standing 8 count from time to time. If you're not familiar with boxing, a standing 8 count is you'll see a ref counting off, and he's giving the boxer time to kind of regain his composure, and he's checking to make sure that the fighter's okay to continue with the match or with the fight. And in our marriages, a lot of times we get very emotional whenever there's conflict. We may be angry when there's conflict. And so with that said, sometimes you do need a standing 8 count. Straight up, I needed a standing 8 count that day, but I was not smart enough or mature enough to know that's what I needed. Otherwise, I would have called for it. Now, in that regards, it's not smart to just leave, because if you leave, your spouse is like, what's going on? You're abandoning me.
Well, you're leaving the ring.
You're leaving the ring, but it is okay if you are having an emotional moment, if you're dealing with something, tell your spouse, hey, I need to call a standing 8 count here. Let's take some time to back away from each other. It could be 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, but let's take some time to regain our composure, let our emotions settle down, to where we're led by the Holy Spirit, the presence of God, instead of being led by our emotions. But The problem with that is a lot of times when things settle down, people think, well, it's okay
everything's
now.
okay and it's all better. And really it hasn't
You
been
have
settled.
not resolved the issue. So don't sweep it under the rug. You've got to make sure that you were disciplined enough to go back. It could be 30 minutes, could be an hour. I don't know. But it's always wise to go back and really resolve the issue now that you've calmed down, instead of pretending like, oh, everything's okay and not resolving the issue.
Well, let's also talk about how stress can play into our disagreements or our different fights that we have.
Well, here's what I want to say, though, because but great point. But before we get to that, I want to say this. The Bible actually gives us, your standing 8 count could be 15 minutes, could be an hour. Make sure you go back and you deal with that. But the Bible actually tells us to make sure that we have a time frame, and it gives us a time frame to deal with conflict whenever it comes up. I'm going to read a verse here to you, and it's found in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. Paul writes this. He says, in your anger, do not sin. In other words, don't let your emotion cause you to sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. So what Paul is telling us in this verse, and we learn from this for our marriages, is that you have to make sure that there is a time frame there. Don't let, and you and I have kind of always honored this. We're not going to let the sun go down in our wrath. When we're angry with each other, we're not going to let a long period of time pass. In fact, we're going to deal with this and not carry it over into the next day.
In fact, there's been many times that we've stayed up late at night to hash things out because of that very thing. I'm not going to bed until we have this settled.
And we have stayed up before till 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning before hashing things out and dealing with things. So it's okay to call for a standing 8 count. I need some time to regain my composure. I need some time to get my thoughts
But then
healthy
get back in the ring and fight for your marriage.
Deal with what the issue is in a healthy way. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Great words from a great apostle. Now, so stress. Let's talk about stress.
Well, I think stress plays into our conflicts. Sometimes we just, I know I'm going to speak for myself, that if something has happened in my day, it may not have anything to do with you, but if something happens in my day and I'm in knots about it, I am the type of person that I need to get it out. And sometimes, unfortunately, it has come out on you in an unhealthy way, and then start causing even more conflict in my life because it really may not have had anything to do with you. But then other times we may just, tend to carry all of this stress that is coming from the outside until where we just explode, and then we take it out on each other. We explode on each other. And so I think we need to talk about, when you're in the ring like that, fighters, isn't there a rule about like no low blows and stuff like that?
Yeah.
And that where people result to name calling and different things like that.
I think that's a good point you bring up, because it's like a lot of times in your emotion, you want to lash out at the person as low as you can to hurt them. And yeah, you're right. I didn't realize you were paying attention during all those fights, but that's good. You've been paying attention during the MMA. You're not allowed as a fighter to hit below the belt. And so we would say no low blows. And I think that's great. You bring that up as well as in your marriage when you're dealing with conflict. Don't hit each other in soft spots. Don't bring up things from the past.
And the tendency is to you bring up things from the past. You want to like point out the other person's weakness and things. You feel like if you can get that jab or that last word in or whatever. And it may give you that temporary relief of, oh yeah, I got you. Like you looked back and said, haha, I made you cry, kind of thing.
It's almost like I'm going to hurt you before you hurt me.
Right. And it's a protective mechanism and part of putting up a wall to protect yourself as well.
So we're talking about looking at this from the fighter aspect. Stay in the ring. Make sure that you it's okay to call for standing 8 count, no low blows. I like this one because this comes from watching wrestling whenever I was a kid. And it's the mindset of no foreign objects in the ring, no other people in the ring.
But yet they did that in wrestling.
Yeah,
they brought in
whenever I was growing up watching
metal
wrestling,
chairs.
when the referee would turn his back, he would always get distracted, and they'd throw a chair in the ring. He'd bash the other fighter in the head, the other wrestler in the head with a chair, or another wrestler would jump in and beat up the guy, whatever. And with that mindset, it's this: don't bring up things from the past. I think you've kind of already dealt with that. But make sure that you don't bring other people in as well. Like you know what, you just like your mama, you just like your daddy, whatever. Don't bring up things from the past. Don't bring other people in, because that's not fair.
Yeah.
It's not healthy within.
It's just making the wound deeper.
Yeah, I agree with that. And when you deal with, remember, we talked about healthy and unhealthy ways to deal with conflict. That's a very unhealthy way. And then this is, I guess we'll kind of wrap this up and bring it to this. You got to know when to call the referee in. Okay, it is okay to call in a ref. Proverbs 11:14 says, "Without wise leadership, a nation fails. There is safety in having many advisors." My question is this: when there's crisis in your marriage, when there's conflict in your marriage, do you know when to call in help? Okay. Who is somebody that we're talking about not bringing other people in, but it is okay to have maybe an older couple that you love and trust.
Someone that can give you wise counsel.
Give you wise, godly counsel in regards to your marriage. It's probably not, and this may offend some people whenever I say, probably not going to be your parents, okay? The reason why is your parents probably can give you wise, godly counsel, but they're always going to be biased towards their baby, okay? And it may make the situation a little more uncomfortable. I'm not saying that to offend. You want to be fair in the situation. So maybe it's okay to go sit down with your pastor. Maybe it's okay to go sit down with a marriage counselor.
Right.
We've been trained through the years, especially within the church, the body of Christ. Oh, don't go to counseling. That's for weak people. No, that's for smart people.
Smart people go to counseling. Yes.
You're able to call in some help. And it's very, very valuable to be able to have an outside party look at your marriage in an unbiased way and be able to help you navigate some of the things that you're facing.
Right. Absolutely.
So I hope that some of these things that we talk about today have been helpful for you, because we all deal with conflict.
Yes.
And we've talked about unhealthy conflict. We've talked about healthy conflict. A lot of people get in the mindset of we're fighting a lot, so we just need to get divorced. That's not it. Fight for your marriage.
Stay in the ring.
Stay in the ring and fight for your marriage, and learn to deal with things that come up in a healthy way so that you can have a healthy and strong marriage.
Yes.
So anything you want to add before?
I do hope that this is helping those that are listening, so that they can resolve things in a healthy way and
have a healthy and strong marriage.
Have a healthy and strong marriage. Absolutely.
And so thank you so much for being a part today and listening to this episode. We've had a great time talking about dealing with conflict as it comes up, dealing with it in a godly way, dealing with it in a healthy way. If you are enjoying Love Like Crazy, do us a favor. Let your friends and your family know about this. Like, subscribe, share, leave us a review. If you've got some ideas for some episodes that you would like to hear about. Actually, you said this earlier.
Yes.
This topic came about because somebody suggested that we talk about conflict. And so if there's something you think about you'd like to hear more about, let us know in a review. Just, maybe drop that suggestion. And so we've had a great time today talking about this. So once again, thank you for being a part of this podcast today. I'm Jay.
And I'm Stacey.
And this is Love Like Crazy.